So most of this work was done by these two students, Saksham and Qizhe, who are on the job market and hence couldn't be at the conference. So I get to present the paper. This is in collaboration with our theory colleague, David Shmoys, and Amin Vahdat at Google. So harmony. Let's see. So building distributed systems is hard. And if you're one of those people who like to enjoy hearing people rant, all you have to do is ask a distributed systems person why. Why is it hard to build distributed systems? And you will get a lot of favorite answers. Everybody will start ranting for days, weeks, maybe months. But one of the fundamental reasons why you may imagine that building distributed systems is hard is because we build these systems on top of these networks that provide very, very weak guarantees today. We refer to them as best effort networks, right? The way these networks work today, they can have unpredictable queuing, right? So we build these systems on top of these networks that provide so-called best effort delivery. You have absolutely no guarantees on what kind of queuing the messages that you're sending over the network might observe, what kind of delays they might observe. The network one time may feel like, I don't feel like delivering this message. It will drop the message. You may have to retransmit the message many, many times before it's actually delivered to the network, to the receiver. So essentially, it's best effort, and everything is unpredictable. So best effort networks, unpredictable queuing, delays, and congestion-related drops. Essentially, as a system designer, what could you do with these networks, right? The best thing you can do is make worst-case assumptions. You basically cannot rely upon anything from the network, so we make worst-case assumptions to operate correctly on these networks. And what that means is that we put all this inefficiency and complexity into our host systems, right? Whatever systems are running on the host, both hardware and software systems. So I think we have known this for a very, very long time, that best effort networks are not ideal for distributed system design. What I want to tell you over the next 2-3 slides is my view of why this problem is really, really, really going to get worse over the next couple of years. So to understand that, let's see where the unpredictability and variability of best effort networks comes from. I would argue that there are two reasons: queuing delays and switch buffer overflows. So if you look at this graph, x-axis is showing how bandwidth is growing. So think of it as access-linked bandwidth in data center networks. On y-axis, I'm showing two different kinds of latencies. One is that if I had a single packet in the network, how long would it take for you to transmit that packet from the sender to the receiver? Okay? So this is basically the sum of transmission delays, propagation delays, and switching delays. It turns out that hardware latency with high bandwidth networks have kind of reached its fundamental limits because transmission delays have really become very small. It takes 120 nanoseconds to transmit 1 MT worth of data on 100 gigabits, 30 nanoseconds on 400 gigabits. Right? So even if you're traversing 6 or 8 hops, it's basically a few hundred nanoseconds, and that's about it. So basically, your hardware latency has really become really small, and it's in single-digit microseconds. On the other hand, on the system side, we have done a lot of fantastic work over the last decade to reduce the host latency variability. With all these kernel bypass techniques, we can actually get host latency variability in most cases down to a single-digit microsecond as well. So where is this latency coming from? Why do we say that data centers are observing 200, 400, 800 microsecond latency? All of it is just queuing delay. If you do some very simple calculation based on switch buffer sizes and link bandwidths, you will see that every time a single packet is dropped in the network, some buffer has filled up, which means all the packets in that buffer are observing queuing delays. And what this red line is showing is the maximum queuing delay that you will observe at a single switch. So if you have 8 hops, you might observe 8 times this queuing delay. So queuing delays, the worst case queuing delays, are really, really large compared to the hardware latency. So, and this is where unpredictability is coming from. So what do networks do to handle this unpredictability? Well, they use two different ideas. The first idea is congestion control. Okay, so this is a classical problem many, many decades ago. And what I want to convince you is that with these high bandwidth networks, congestion control is going to become more and more ineffective. So what I have on the x-axis is message sizes, which is some workload from production clusters. On the y-axis, I'm showing you the distribution of the number of messages with certain message sizes. And if I look at this bandwidth delay product, which is the amount of data that you want to keep in flight to fully utilize the network, for 10 gigabit networks, this is what the bandwidth delay product was in terms of message size, right? So a lot of messages were larger than one bandwidth delay product. If I look at 100 gigabits, the situation is already changing. With 400 gigabits, basically most of the messages are already small than one bandwidth delay product, right? And with larger links, you will see more and more of this problem. So why is this important? Because in classical congestion control protocols, what we know is if you want to best utilize your network, you want to keep one bandwidth delay product worth of data in flight all the time. Yes. And what does that mean for congestion control? That since most of my messages are less than 1 BDP, I will not even get to do congestion control for them. I will just transmit them into the network, and without knowing whether there's congestion or not, and if there's congestion or packet drops, I get to do nothing because all the bytes are already in the network. And a study from Google actually showed a similar trade-off, similar observations that for their network, 80% of the messages were less than the 1 BDP long. So congestion control is kind of messed up. Let me give you one more. If you're not worried about this, let me give you one more point to worry about. Yes? I suspect that the traffic is going to get extremely bursty just with 400 gigabit links. Here's a very simple calculation. If I take 128 kilobyte RPCs and consider a network with 400 gigabit links, even running at 50% network load, if you do the math, there will be an RPC generated at each sender every 5 microseconds. One RPC generated every 5 microseconds. So imagine the number of RPCs I'm injecting into the network. But more importantly, if my network latency, hardware latency is 10 microseconds, I'm generating 2 RPCs by the time I can even get a response back from the receiver. So the traffic is going to get more bursty, congestion control is going to become ineffective. Okay, the next point is, fine, congestion control takes some time to converge, figure out the right rates. During this time, how do today's best effort networks handle problems? Well, they rely on buffering at switches. They say, okay, fine, I'm transmitting the data into the network. If I make some mistakes, that's fine because that data will be buffered in the switches at the network. The problem is if you look at technology trends, it turns out that switch buffer sizes have really become stagnant. So even if BDP is increasing, more data is in the network. With most recent switches, even though your switch capacity is increasing, it takes only 50 microseconds to actually fill up the switch buffers. So you are going to likely see a lot more packet drops. So all this to say that with best effort networks, we system designers, we have a choice to make. We can continue thinking about best effort networks, or we can actually think about how to improve this status quo. Okay, and this is where one of my favorite papers from the last decade of computer networking comes into picture, FastPass. This was one of the papers that asked a very, very interesting question. It said, is it possible, forget about best network, is it possible to provide stronger guarantees from the network with maybe some overheads? I'm willing to incur some tiny latency or bandwidth overheads, but is it possible to provide stronger guarantees? And this is where our paper Harmony also lies. We are asking the same question, and we are actually leading to the same answer as well, but in a very different way. The answer is that we want to design a network where we can proactively guarantee that it will be congestion-free. I will explain what congestion-free exactly means, but the idea is that somehow I will design a network where I will guarantee you beforehand that switches always experience bounded queuing at each switch in the network. Okay? So I'll proactively guarantee that switch buffers are always used by a small amount of data. So why is this interesting? Because if I can somehow bound the queue occupancy at switches, then I have bounded the queuing delays at switches. That's okay. Bounded the queuing delays at switches, which means that in failure-free scenarios, I've also bounded the network delays. Okay. And since each switch is occupying or is experiencing bounded queue occupancy, I have basically eliminated congestion-related drops. Because of hardware failures, there will still be drops, but congestion-related drops are eliminated. And if you think about it for a little bit, you will see that you can also react very fast using these properties of predictable network delays. So FastPass came up with the centralized architecture for data center networks, saying that we will use a centralized scheduler to schedule each and every packet into the network and decide what path that packet takes and when is it scheduled. And it guarantees that every packet observes 0, not just bounded, but 0 queuing into the system, okay, at each switch. Okay, so what Harmony does was thinking about, okay, can we think about distributed congestion-free data center architecture? And our key insight after a long time trying this was that 0 queuing is a very, very hard goal to achieve in a distributed setting. I'll show you some ideas, but it's very, very hard. So it has very non-trivial overheads. So let's try and focus on bounded queuing, because there's nothing magical about 0. If I can bound the queuing to say 10 packets at every switch in the network, we are still very good. So we decided to focus on bounded queuing. Okay, so what is the high-level idea? It's a distributed protocol, Harmony. It does admission control, right, if you want to bound queues. And it does admission control both at the receiver side and in the network. Okay, so it's a coordinated admission control inside the network as well as receiver. It will become clear in a minute. Receivers and network switches make admission decisions without explicit coordination. So there is no coordination, explicit coordination happening. And what do we use for admission control? A classical protocol that at least many of us love, resource reservation protocol. Okay, but with a twist, and I want to focus a little bit on that twist. So what we do is we take each physical link in the data center network and we decompose it into multiple virtual links. One way to imagine this is, suppose I have this topology, I will take each physical link and I will start decomposing it logically into multiple virtual links, each physical link. And what I'll do is I'll do reservations on this virtual link granularity. So everybody, and it will become clear in a minute why we are doing this at virtual links. Each message can use multiple virtual links, but each virtual link is only for one message at a time. Okay. And then we will have this parameter called delta admission, where we will guarantee that where we will say that if a message is admitted, it must be admitted within this time, otherwise it is rejected and the sender must try again. All right, so how does distributed 0? So let me give you a protocol with distributed 0 queuing with RSVP. Okay, so the idea is very simple. I have this topology. The red one wants to send a message to the blue one, and it sends a message saying, hey, I have some data for you. That message traverses through the network, reaches blue. Blue says, well, I have a pending request from the sender. Let me admit this message. It will send this admission message into the network. As this admission message is traversing the network, it is reserving resources for that message. And as it reaches the sender, it has a path reserved or set of resources reserved. This is how RSVP works. And then the sender, what it can do is it can start transmitting at full rate because it has all those messages reserved for you itself, right? And these messages or these resources are unreserved and it traverses. Do I get no extra minute?
You can take time into your question period.
Oh, okay. Fine. Good. So the important thing to note is that in failure-free scenarios, receivers get data within a delay bound, whatever that delay bound will be. So what if I have multiple concurrent messages? Well, suppose I have this message reserved. Again, this message from the sender goes in and says, I have something to send to you. Receiver will say, OK, let me try to admit you. Now, as this RSVP message traverses, it might reach a switch where there's no outgoing resources. So it will send a reject message. And these reject messages traverse on the reverse path. There are some tricks that we have to be careful about. But basically, you can retry within that delta admission time. And at some point, if the sender receives this RSVP message, it can again transmit the data. OK? Good. So this is for a single k equal to 1. The important thing to note here is that since each link is getting the data at each switch, the incoming data rate is the same as the outgoing data rate. There is no queuing happening. So it's a zero queue network. So like I was saying, in Harmony, what we realized when we were working on this is that RSVP maintains zero queuing, but the expected utilization, which is the network utilization, drops to this 1 minus 1 over E factor, which is roughly 37% throughput degradation. And we were very curious why this is happening. Some of you who might have seen this 1 minus 1 over E factor, you might be thinking Aloha protocol, it's random access, and that's why it's 1 minus 1 over E. That's a high-level idea. So it turns out that we sat down and we tried to figure out why is this drop happening. It turns out that what we showed is that when you are trying to send only a single message and reserve, that all these, since each host and switcher is making decisions in a purely random way, completely uncoordinated, it's very hard to avoid conflicts. And if we give it multiple virtual links, then these conflicts can be avoided with a small k. So a small number of virtual links. It's a very simple analysis, but basically the system now looks like this. I have multiple virtual links. Each message can be transmitted over multiple paths, each of a smaller capacity. And the intuition for the queue bound is that I have these multiple virtual links. So if you think from a switch perspective, on each virtual link, I'm getting one message per unit time. But on a physical link, since all these virtual links are sending at the same time, I might get k messages per k units of time. I'm still getting, my incoming rate is still the same as outgoing rate, but I have at most k messages that can come in k units of time, and that's where the queuing bound comes. The actual queuing bound is slightly higher because messages can accumulate over multiple hops, but it's not too large. So there are many design details in the paper that you can see, especially some of the nice theoretical results and how do we use this. But what I want to show you is what is the cost of this distributed protocol. That's where I started, fast pass. So we have these two parameters, k, the number of virtual links, and this admission delay time. And what this graph shows is the feasibility region of Harmony. One way to imagine this feasibility region is if I do a parameter sweep across different values of k and different values of delta admission, I can guarantee the x-axis, which is the network delay bound, what will be the bound for each message, and I can sustain as much load as on the y-axis. Right? So if I look at this black point, it's basically saying I can guarantee you a delay of 12 times the hardware latency while sustaining 45% network load. And depending on k and delta admission, you can move this you can move within this feasibility region. The interesting thing is, if I put together the fast pass feasibility region within this curve, it's very, very close. And this is what the trade-off point I was talking about, that it is okay to have a small amount of bounded queuing. You don't have to really focus on zero queuing, and you can get fastpass kind of properties. The intuition is that when fastpass is doing zero queuing, a lot of messages have to sit at the sender, and there's a lot more time spent at the sender, while we can admit messages faster because we have multiple virtual links. The interesting thing is, for any sustainable load less than 0.9, the delay bound is close to fastpass, and Harmony can sustain load similar to fastpass. I do want to make sure that we understand the x-axis is the worst case delay bound. Our average latency is slightly higher than fastpass. Okay? But it gives this very nice, simple design, distributed design, that achieves these bounded queuing at all switches in the network. So there are some benefits we explore. I'm going to walk through this quickly. The first one is, can we get RDMA? Can we enable RDMA, or can we simplify RDMA NIC design? One of the problems with RDMA NIC designs is that they do not perform well with lossy fabrics, and they use PFC, which has its own problems. And Harmony by design already guarantees losslessness. There are other potential benefits that we have explored in the paper, including CPU-efficient host network stacks, some storage stacks work, and the high-level idea in all of these is that predictability, even this weak form of predictability, can actually be very powerful for higher loss systems. Okay? I want to spend 10-15 seconds on some limitations. One of the things is we only guarantee network delays. It would be nice to extend Harmony to provide end-to-end delays, which means application layer, all the way to the socket. And there are some interesting questions around that. The second one is we require a lot of support from the network. So it is feasible to implement Harmony today, but it would be nice to ask, hey, is it possible? Can we get similar kind of guarantees without any network support? Very interesting question. Our theoretical bounds are primarily on queuing. It would be nice to extend them on sustainable loads. And finally, I think a broader question that what other guarantees can we support from the network without too many overheads? And I think best effort networks are a pain. They just simplify network operators' life, and that's why they are there. We should really be thinking beyond best effort networks, and there are many potential applications to having just bounded network queuing, and much more work needs to be done. This is only the first step. Thank you very much.